She showed up to my daughter's engagement dinner wearing a $500 blouse and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I noticed it the moment they walked through my front door, my daughter beaming like I hadn't seen her beam since she was 9 years old and got a puppy for Christmas, and beside her, this man she'd been seeing for 8 months. His name was Clifton, 34 years old, worked in real estate investment, which I later learned meant he had a business card and a dream. He shook my hand with both of his, looked me square in the eye, and said, "Sir, your daughter has changed my life." I said, "Is that right?" Not a question, just 2 words, flat and quiet. My wife, Paulette, touched my arm from behind me and whispered, "Be nice. I was always nice. That was never the problem." We sat down to dinner. Myself, Paulette, my daughter Ivy, Clifton, and my son-in-law's parents who came in from Kelowna for the occasion. Good people, salt of the earth. His mother brought butter tarts wrapped in wax paper, which told me everything I needed to know about where Clifton came from versus where he was trying to go. Paulette had made a full roast. Potatoes, Yorkshire pudding, the kind of Sunday dinner she only makes when she wants someone to feel at home. Clifton did not feel at home. He assessed the room. I watched him do it, not obviously, not rudely, but I've been in sales for 32 years. I know when a man is calculating. His eyes moved across the built-ins, the artwork my wife collected over decades, the photo above the fireplace from the year we all went to Prince Edward Island. He looked at our house the way an appraiser does, not the way a guest does. I told myself I was being unfair. My daughter loved him. She was 31 years old and radiant, and she had brought this man to meet us, and the least I could do was pass him the gravy without prejudice. So I did. I passed him the gravy. I asked him questions about his work. I listened to his answers. Clifton was, I'll give him this, a gifted talker. He had a way of speaking that made everything sound almost specific. There was always a development in the works, always a deal nearly closed, always a partner lined up. Numbers floated around without ever landing anywhere. He mentioned a condo project in Brantford. He mentioned a contact at a development firm in Calgary. He mentioned, offhandedly, that he'd been approached about a property in Whistler, but wasn't sure the timing was right. My daughter looked at him the way you look at someone you believe in completely. And I sat there smiling, watching, eating Paulette's roast and thinking, something is off. After dessert, Clifton asked if he could say a few words. He stood up from the table, stood up, as if it were a speech, and talked about how much he loved my daughter, how she was the first woman who had ever really understood his ambitions, how he could see a real future with her. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a ring. Small, stone, nice setting. My daughter made a sound I've never heard from her before, this broken little gasp of joy, and she said yes before he'd even asked the question properly. Paulette cried. His mother cried. His father shook my hand and said, "Welcome to the family." And I shook back and said, "Same to you." Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Paulette and I were washing up, and she said, "What do you think?" I said, "I think he's going to ask us for money." She turned off the tap and looked at me. "Don't do that," she said. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm just telling you what I think. You always do this when Ivy brings someone home." "I don't," I said. "I liked Martin. I liked Ryan." "You tolerated Ryan." "Ryan was fine. Clifton is different." "Different how?" I didn't have a good answer for that yet. Just a feeling, so I dried my hands and went to bed. 3 weeks later, I got a call from my daughter. She wanted to come over. Just her, she said. She wanted to talk about the wedding. I said, of course. "Come for lunch, your mother will make soup." She came on a Thursday. We sat at the kitchen table, and Paulette put out bread, and she poured tea, and my daughter spread a folder on the table, an actual folder, with printed pages inside. She'd been doing research, she said, about venues, about what a proper wedding in this area costs. I looked at the pages. There were listings for event spaces I'd never heard of. Venues in Niagara-on-the-Lake, a restored heritage property outside of Hamilton. One page showed a place in Muskoka that did all-inclusive packages. The number at the bottom of that page was $94,000. I kept my face still. "Ivy," I said, "this is what you're thinking?" She looked at me steadily. "I know it's a lot, Dad." "I'm not commenting on whether it's a lot. I'm asking if this is genuinely what you want." She looked down at the folder. "It's what we want," she said, which told me it was what Clifton wanted. I asked her what their budget was. She hesitated, just a half second, but I caught it, and then said they were hoping to contribute around $15,000 between them. The rest, she said, she was hoping family could help with. Paulette's hand found mine under the table. I asked how much she was thinking. "Clifton thinks something around $120,000 would cover everything properly," she said, "with the venue and the catering and the photographer and the dress and—" "Where is Clifton's family in this?" I asked. "His parents are on a fixed income, Dad. His parents drove here from Kelowna in a late-model pickup truck that cost $45,000, I said. "I'm not saying they're wealthy. I'm asking where they are in this conversation." Ivy looked at me the way my daughter looks at me when she is bracing herself. "I've known that look since she was 4 years old. Clifton says in his family it's traditional for the bride's parents to cover the majority of the wedding." I looked at her for a long moment. "Is that right?" I said. "Not a question." That night, after Ivy left, I went to my office and I sat down at my desk, and I didn't turn on the light for a while. I'm 63 years old. I have worked since I was 16. I started as a stock boy at a hardware store in Sudbury, and I worked my way into industrial supply sales, and I built something over 4 decades, not a fortune, but something real and solid, and ours, Paulette and I have a house that's paid off, retirement savings, enough. We are not the people you come to when you want to throw a $120,000 wedding. And even if we were, even if the money meant nothing, there was something about the way that ask came through my daughter's mouth, using Clifton's words, that made my jaw tight. I started looking into him the next morning. Not in any dramatic way. I just started paying attention. I looked up the Brunford development he'd mentioned at dinner. I couldn't find any record of it. I searched his name alongside the Calgary firm he'd referenced. Nothing. I found his LinkedIn profile, which had been updated 6 weeks prior, and listed him as principal of a company called Greystone Capital Partners, registered in Ontario. I looked up the registration. The company was 11 months old. I called my friend Hugh, who has spent his career in commercial lending. I asked him if he'd ever heard of Greystone Capital Partners. He hadn't. I described what Clifton had told us at dinner. The deals, the contacts, the Whistler property. Hugh listened and then said, "That sounds like someone who's building a story." "Building a story," I repeated. "Not necessarily a lie," he said, "but not a track record either. Be careful." I thanked him and hung up. Over the following 2 weeks, I paid careful attention to small things. The car Clifton drove was leased. I know the sticker because I've bought 4 cars in my life, and I know how a lease sticker sits in the window. He mentioned in passing that he was between apartments, subletting from a friend in Oakville. He said it casually, the way you say something you want to sound casual. My daughter told me, also in passing, that she had lent him $800 the month before for a registration fee on one of his deals. Just temporarily, she said. He was going to pay her back. She said it like it was nothing. To me, it was everything. I called Ivy the following Sunday. I told her I wanted to have lunch with her, just the 2 of us, before Paulette and I made any decisions about contributing to the wedding. She agreed. We met at a Thai place on King Street that she's loved since university. We ordered, and I waited until the food came, and then I said, "Tell me about the $800. She looked at her plate. "He told you," she said. "No," I said. "You did. A few weeks ago. You mentioned it and then moved on. I didn't." She was quiet. "How many times has something like that happened?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. I waited. I've learned, over 63 years, that silence is the most honest question you can ask a person. "A few times," she finally said. "It's always been temporary. He always explains why." "How much total, Ivy?" She looked up at me. Her eyes were steady. "But I know, my daughter. She was working very hard to look steady. "Around 9,000, she said. "Over the last 8 months." I put my fork down. "Does he know you've told me this?" "No." "Good," I said. "Don't tell him." She looked frightened then. Not of me. She knows I would walk through fire for her. But of what I might be about to say. "Dad." "I'm not going to do anything reckless," I said. "I'm going to look into some things. And I need you to not tell Clifton that we had this conversation. Can you do that for me?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Do you think he's a bad person?" I said, "I think you deserve someone who doesn't need $9,000 from you in 8 months." She cried quietly into a water glass. I reached across and held her hand, and we sat there for a while without saying anything. Hugh helped me find a private inquiry firm. I won't call it anything more dramatic than that. A retired RCMP officer who now works independently and does background and financial due diligence. His name is not important. I hired him. I gave him Clifton's full name, the company name, everything I had. He came back to me in 10 days. Greystone Capital Partners had no assets on record. The Brantford development was a preliminary proposal that had never been approved, filed under a different company that Clifton had been loosely associated with before it dissolved. The Calgary firm did exist, but when the investigator made a discreet inquiry, they had no knowledge of Clifton specifically. The Whistler property story was unverifiable. What was verifiable? Clifton had a civil judgment against him in small claims court from 2021, filed by a woman in Mississauga for $4,200, listed as personal loan, unpaid. There was a second one, 2023, for $6,700, filed by a man in Barrie. Both judgments had gone largely unpaid. There was more. A former business partner who'd given a statement in the small claims process described a pattern. Clifton would enter a relationship, personal or professional, present himself as successful and on the verge of a breakthrough, borrow money against the promise of repayment once a deal closed, and then delay, explain, and eventually distance himself. The deals never closed because the deals were never real. He wasn't a criminal in the traditional sense. He was something harder to prosecute, a man who let people believe things and then moved on. My daughter had given him $9,000. He had asked her parents for $120,000 more. I sat with the report for 2 days. I didn't show Paulette right away. I needed to think clearly before I let my feelings take over. What I felt, sitting with those papers, was something I don't have a clean word for. A kind of grief, almost, that my daughter had gotten this far in before any of us saw it clearly. And underneath that, something harder, quiet and absolute. I called Ivy. I told her I had something I needed to show her. I told her to come alone and to tell Clifton she was having dinner with her mother. She came that evening. I made her a cup of tea. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd spread that folder 3 weeks earlier, and I placed the report in front of her. I watched her read it. She was quiet for a very long time. The kind of quiet that isn't silence. It's a person rearranging everything they thought was true. When she finally looked up, her eyes were dry. That surprised me. I'd expected tears. Instead, she looked at me with an expression I recognized, because I have seen it in the mirror. It was the expression of someone who already knew and had been waiting for permission to know it. The $800 was for a registration fee that didn't exist, she said. It wasn't a question. Most likely, I said. And the $9,000? I don't know exactly where all of it went. Some of it may have gone to things that were real. The pattern is what matters. She was quiet again. I loved him, she said. Past tense, I noticed. I know you did, I said. I believed everything he said. He's very good at what he does, I said. That's not a reflection on you. She folded the report closed carefully, the way you handle something that has weight. Then she said, "What do I do now?" I said, "That's up to you, but I want you to know that whatever you decide, your mother and I are here, and that money, your money, we're going to try to get it back." The civil, small claims route was Hugh's suggestion. We had 2 of the previous judgments as precedent, and with the documentation from my investigator, it was a stronger case than it might have looked. We found a paralegal in Hamilton who handles exactly this kind of matter, financial misrepresentation in personal relationships, and she was frank with us. We might recover some, we might not recover all, and it would take time. It took 7 months. Clifton, to my complete lack of surprise, did not go quietly. He maintained for a good portion of those months that the loans had been willing gifts, that my daughter had been a generous partner who understood the nature of investment timelines, that I was a controlling father interfering in his daughter's relationships. His lawyer sent a letter. Our paralegal sent one back. At the hearing, which was not dramatic, small claims court in Ontario rarely is, Ivy presented text messages, specific messages in which Clifton had requested each amount, detailed the purpose, and promised specific repayment dates. 11 messages over 8 months. The repayment dates had all passed. Not one had been met. The adjudicator awarded my daughter $8,400 plus filing costs. Not every cent, but enough. Clifton had 30 days to pay. He paid. I suspect because not paying would have created a judgment on record that would have followed him further into his next attempt at whatever he was planning. Ivy is well. I want to be careful how I say that. Well doesn't mean fine, and it doesn't mean quick. She had some hard months. There was a period in the winter where she wasn't herself, where she'd call me on weekday evenings just to talk, and we'd talk about nothing in particular, and I understood that what she needed was not advice, but just the sound of someone who had always been there. I am not a man who cries easily. I come from people who don't. But I will tell you that on one of those calls, in January, when she said out of nowhere, "Dad, I don't know how you knew," I had to clear my throat twice before I could answer. "I didn't know," I told her. "I just paid attention." Most dads wouldn't have pushed. "Most dads don't have 32 years in sales," I said. She laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd heard from her in a while, and I held on to the sound of it. She's back at work now, fully. She went on a trip to Portugal with her friend in the spring. She sends me photos sometimes, of the food mostly, and once of a sunset over the water that she captioned, "Still out here, Dad. Still good." I have that photo on my phone. I look at it more than I'll admit. Paulette asked me once, near the end of all of it, whether I felt any satisfaction. After the hearing, after the check came, after everything. I thought about it honestly. "Not satisfaction," I said. "Relief." "Relief that she's okay?" "Relief that I didn't let the politeness stop me," I said. "I almost did. There were about 6 moments in there where it would have been easier to smile and write the check and tell myself I was being paranoid." Paulette was quiet for a second. "What stopped you?" "She did," I said. "The way she said we when she meant he. The way she went still when I asked about the money. She was asking me to look in her own way. She just didn't have the words for it." Paulette nodded slowly. "Then you were paying attention," she said. "I was paying attention," I said. "That, in the end, is the only thing I did. I was a father who paid attention. And sometimes, when the person you love can't yet say what's happening to them out loud, paying attention is the one thing that can change everything." There's a moment near the end of all this that I keep coming back to. Not the hearing, not the check arriving. It's a much quieter moment. Ivy on the phone in January, asking me how I knew, and my honest answer, I didn't know. I just refused to look away. I think about what would have happened if I'd been polite. If I'd smiled at that dinner table and written the number down and told myself I was being an overprotective father. It would have been so easy. It is always easier to convince yourself that the discomfort you feel is your own flaw, rather than a signal worth following. I almost did it. Several times. There were moments where the social pressure to simply be agreeable nearly won. What stopped me wasn't cleverness. It was a choice to trust what I was seeing over what I was supposed to feel. That kind of honesty, the kind you aim at yourself first, is harder than it sounds. It means admitting that something is wrong before you have proof. It means asking questions that might make you unpopular. Clifton was good at making people feel that scrutiny was unkind. That's a tool people like him rely on. The moment you hesitate to ask a direct question because you don't want to seem rude, they've already won half the game. But here's what I've come to understand about integrity, and I mean the real kind, not the word you put on a motivational poster. It isn't just about being honest with other people. It's about being honest about what you're seeing when it's inconvenient to see it. Ivy had $9,000 missing from her life and a folder full of wedding venues she didn't choose, and somewhere underneath all of it, she already knew. She just needed someone to confirm that her instincts weren't paranoia, that her discomfort wasn't ingratitude, that love doesn't actually require you to fund a fiction. What Clifton lacked wasn't talent. He was sharp, persuasive, well-dressed. What he lacked was any genuine regard for the people around him. He had traded that away somewhere along the line in exchange for short-term gain, and every loan that went unpaid, every judgment filed against him in small claims court, every woman or man who walked away poorer, that's the accumulated cost of choosing to take rather than build. The world has a long memory for that kind of thing, even when the individual consequences seem slow to arrive. And Ivy, what she showed in those final months took more courage than I'll ever say to her face, to sit at a kitchen table and read a report that dismantles the story you've been living inside, to answer questions about money you thought you'd willingly given, to say out loud, in a Thai restaurant on King Street, around 9,000, and not flinch away from it. That is not a small thing. That is someone deciding that the truth, however uncomfortable, is worth more than the comfort of not knowing. I'm 63. I've made my share of mistakes. I've stayed quiet when I should have spoken and pushed when I should have waited. But if I've learned anything, it's this. Paying attention is not a passive act. It is one of the most active forms of love there is. Ivy got her money back. More than that, she got her footing back. And I got to be the father who showed up when it counted, not because I was clever, but because I refused to look the other way. That's enough for me.